Your common sizing and fit alteration questions answered. Hello and welcome to the Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making all things beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka and you can find me elsewhere online as the Crimson Stitchery, including in our Ravelry group and on Instagram. And this video comes to you courtesy of all of my lovely and wonderful supporters on Patreon who are helping me keep this channel going through monthly membership subscriptions. And we have a really fabulous and lively Patreon community with a lot of discussions over on Discord, which is a private chatting app kind of thing. So if you're enjoying the Crimson Stitchery and that appeals to you, do head over to patreon.com/thecrimsonstitchery to check out all of the exclusive benefits and choose the right tier for you. Thank you so much to all of my patrons for your ongoing support. This video continues my series on knitting alterations, adapting existing knitting patterns for size and fit. So a little while back I posted on my YouTube community tab and asked viewers to tell me what specific questions they had surrounding altering knitting patterns for their body type. So the kind of dilemmas that they've been having or the issues they've been running into or things that people had tried to sort out but couldn't quite figure out where it was that they were going wrong, or maybe they'd tried something out and the results just still weren't quite as they had expected. So I'll be covering some of those in this video. I might not be able to answer absolutely everyone's, and it may also be that some things just can't really be talked through and that I actually need to make a tutorial video, so that's just something to bear in mind. But I will do my best. I also want to reiterate now that the main skill to work on, I think, when making alterations is to be willing to just have a go and assess where it's gone wrong and learn to figure out for yourself what it is that worked and what maybe didn't work. I would say be bold, but be very forgiving of yourself, and also maybe just be prepared to rip things out and have another go. I do that all the time. I've been knitting for a long time, I think like 16 years at this point. I've made a lot of garments for myself and I still make mistakes all the time and I still rip things out all the time, and I'm always very willing to share that because, as they say, perfect is the enemy of the good, and it's more important to have, finished something and enjoy it, or really just to, assess your skills base and, what you've actually learned and kind of feel a sense of achievement and positivity, even when you're making mistakes. So that's my little teachery pep talk out of the way. So in this video, I'm just going to be talking fairly broadly about how you might make changes, because when it comes to your individual projects, there are just way too many variables for me to be able to give you any specific advice. I will say that as part of one of my Patreon benefits, you do have the opportunity to book a one-on-one with me where I can actually, be like your tutor and almost like a seminar and, help you out through video call. So, that is something that you're, really, really wanting, then I could be available in that sense. But in this video, we're talking more broadly so that, it can help you make the changes because, your pattern's going to have certain requirements, your yarn's going to have certain requirements. So I can't speak in exacts. But anyway, I thought that we would start by tackling the simple alteration of the body length and the sleeve length. So that one can seem, quite straightforward, like if you're taller or if you're shorter, or you need to make changes according to your gauge, whatever the reason is, if you need to change body length, adding or subtracting. Just be aware of where it is that you need to add length for your personal body type in yourself. So it might be that you need to add length here because you've been, working out and you've developed like really hench shoulder and trapezoid muscles, and all of the arm size are like just squeezing you way too tight, for example. Or it might be that, you're very tall, so that you need to add, length here below the armpit. Then you can think about going between the underarm and the waistline, and then again from waist to high hip, which is where the bone protrudes, and from waist to full seat, which is the widest part of your bum. So just thinking about where and how you're adding or subtracting length. The other thing is sleeve length. Now, I personally find that a lot of more contemporary knitting patterns don't fit me right in the sleeve. And I honestly do not think that I have got particularly long arms. I've got a fairly average, in inverted commas, height and kind of body shape, roughly speaking, for women of my age in the West. I am a giant compared to many of my relatives in Southeast Asia. I am a giant in more ways than one, believe you me. But anyway, you know, I'm like around 5'6", centimeters on screen there. And so on and so forth. And, you know, I don't have particularly long legs or particularly short body or vice versa. But I do find that a lot of contemporary knitting patterns just stop way too short, and it's more of a bracelet sleeve, but it's not necessarily been designed to be a bracelet sleeve. I really just think that it's too short. So when you're taking your arm measurements, I would say be aware of taking the measurement up to this wrist bone, because that is the bracelet length sleeve. And actually take your arm measurement to the bone at the base of your thumb. So for me, that's a good 4 centimeters, or, you know, going towards 1.5 inches maybe of difference. And the reason that I would take my arm measurement to the base of my thumb is because when you bend your arm, that's going to be, you know, the action of that bending there is stretching out the fabric. And so as the fabric stretches in width, it shrinks in length. So every time that you bend your arm, the sleeve is going to ride up, basically. And also, if you're wearing a sweater or a cardigan, you know, that's a little bit tight, but, you know, you want to wear more layers underneath, that's obviously going to increase the size of your arm, which means that, you know, the fabric's going to stretch more and then ride up more. So we don't want to have those kind of sausage casing arms. So yeah, that's just something to bear in mind about sleeve length, I think, because it can be very easy just to, you know, cut a cuff off or rip back and just add a bit more length right at the bottom. But actually, maybe you need more length at the top, because then if you're just adding more length at the bottom, you could just be creating like a longer, narrow piece of fabric here, when actually maybe you just need to kind of shift everything down slightly. So I just want to talk about adding length in that sense. Now I'll move more into the questions, which I've got on my laptop here. And honestly, I had a lot of really excellent questions, raising some really fantastic points, a lot of similarities. So hopefully I can cover most of that. And thank you again to everybody who took the time to write that down. There are a lot of questions surrounding people with a very full or forward projecting bust, and people who, you know, their bust measurement was larger than the recommended waist and hip measurement, and or they had narrow shoulders. But the main issue is that the bust is coming forward much more. And also, don't forget that we don't have boobs on our back. So there's also this issue that, you know, if the bust is larger, you know, but there's more fullness around the front of the body than the back. And there are a lot of questions around, you know, what to do with that excess fabric and how to cope. You know, if we have the garment that fits around our bust, we don't want it to kind of be dangling too much, like draping. I think the word tent was used around the waist and hips, or that if we, you know, knit for the full bust, then the arm side, the kind of whole armhole, armpit area is just thrown up and is just way too baggy, and how to deal with that. And I did also have the opposite problem, which was to do with, you know, having a much fuller hip measurement than the waist and the bust. You know, maybe the upper body area, you know, the shoulder girdle and the bust was like much narrower overall, but this person just had a much broader, you know, fullness in the pelvis. And that's kind of two sides of the same coin. So the main thing that I want to say in response to this is that whilst most knitting patterns, or many knitting patterns I should probably say, recommend that you pick a size based on your bust, actually you can be different sizes across different parts of your body. You might have really slender arms and you don't want big loose sleeves, or, you know, you might have been doing loads of weightlifting and, you know, have a really, you know, developed muscles in your neck, so that even like with your bust size, like the neck size, the collar size is just totally off. I'm just pulling like random examples from the air of how you can have different differentiation, but I'm sure, you know, I'm sure you can imagine if you just kind of go out into the world, hopefully you're not in lockdown anymore, or just watch TV. Actually, TV is not a good idea, because obviously the type of actors are generally cast to like be very beautiful, but maybe you want to, yeah, watch a like harrowing documentary. I don't know, I'm just joking. But I'm sure that you take my point. So yes, you can center your, you know, knitting pattern size around your bust, but actually you can also just pick a different size for a different part of the pattern, and then you kind of grade between. And this is something that I do quite a lot. You know, I might look at a pattern and think, oh, that's got a really, really narrow hip. I'm going to cast on for a bigger size at the hip, and then I'm just going to check out the stitches of the bust at this other size that I want, and I'll, you know, decrease or, you know, maybe increase accordingly. And I'll either just do that, you know, hide it in the side seams, or just add a few extra, or, you know, whatever. I just kind of fudge it around to make it work. The reason that I can't be that specific is because you might have a very particular stitch pattern that requires you to kind of work in multiples of something. So it's kind of up to you to figure out where to hide it, but also think about like where the fabric is being pinched away from according to your own body size. You know, is the way that you kind of decrease or increase, you know, does it mostly happen like along the side of your rib cage, or actually have you got more, you know, more and less fullness around the front and so on? It's up to you to figure it out. But yeah, I think that's the first main point to think about, is that you don't need to stick with one size through the pattern. And actually, sometimes there are a lot of clues in terms of how you can just very simply make the alterations just by picking different sizes and, you know, changing your stitch count accordingly. It's a kind of quick and dirty way of doing it. I really enjoy it, and I highly recommend it to everyone. So I think hopefully that should sort out the bust to hip difference either way. In terms of the bust above the bust towards the shoulder girdle, I totally agree that there are so many patterns where, you know, the bust kind of fits quite nicely, and then the sweater just seems to fall off around the top of the shoulder, or maybe the neck is extremely wide. And you definitely want to be bringing that fabric in. And you want to be bringing it in, you know, in various different places. Certainly around the actual arm side, you know, here, this sort of vertical sense. But actually you can create vertical darts, additional vertical darts through the piece. Just keep thinking about where the neckline is going to be positioned according to the fabric, and I would say just experiment. But yes, if you've got a fuller bust and a narrower shoulder, and you notice that the sweaters are kind of falling off the edge of your shoulder bone, kind of dropping down like that quite a lot, or if it's just kind of floppy and doesn't work out, you do need to be bringing that fabric in, and it can be extremely dramatic. So just in case anyone doesn't know what a dart is basically when you remove a wedge of fabric in the pattern piece. It's as simple as that. It's when you kind of take a slice out, like a pizza-shaped slice, or a triangle or a diamond. So you're just pinching and pulling the fabric out, as opposed to like the side shaping where you're just kind of shaving a little bit off the sides. A dart is really grabbing out a wedge. And you can see in this bodice pattern of a sewing pattern, this dart above the bust is really quite large. Now, not all sewing patterns have darts. That's because that wodge of fabric that's being taken out can be hidden away, it can be redistributed in different style lines. This sewing pattern fits me, and I just wear like a B cup, you know, I don't have an extremely full bust, like, there's no point pretending. I'm no Jane Mansfield, but even on someone, you know, with my kind of frame, it's still quite a lot of fabric that gets taken out at the shoulder. So don't be afraid of doing it, do be bold. Staying on the subject of shoulders and the shoulder girdle, one of my patrons posed a question privately on our Discord chat server and asked what's the best way to allow for freedom of movement in the shoulder construction. In other words, how would you recommend reducing the amount that a sweater's hem will ride up when you raise your arm? How might you apply such options to a sweater whose design you like, but which you suspect will not allow for such motion? Really great point, one that I'm very glad that was raised. This is all to do with the fit around the armhole. In a nutshell, the tighter that the garment fits around the arm side, the armhole, the more you will be able to move your arms. This is contrary to popular belief and many assumptions, where it is thought that if the armhole is very, very large, your arm will have more physical space to move around in. But actually that inhibits movement, because when you then pick up your arm, the sleeve will pull on the body of the garment and make that rise up. And depending on how the garment is fitted around the body, you know, if it's fitted fairly tightly around the chest or waist, or, you know, if it's like buttoned up, or if it's a dress or something like that, you know, that could actually stop you from lifting your arm up more, because the fabric of the sleeve is connected to the body, so that, you know, it might actually stop you. It might result in unsightly pulling and little drag lines, or that might actually rip the fabric or rip the seam. So contrary to popular belief, the tighter the armhole is, the more movement that the actual arm has. And that's because we're allowed to move the arm independently of the body without the fabric restricting that. Now, obviously, when it comes to knitted garments, there's a lot of unique factors to consider because on the one hand, knitted fabric stretches. So there's immediately much more flexibility with knitted fabric than with garments made from woven fabrics, or indeed many layers of woven fabrics like tailored garments, or the kind of historical garments that I used to make that had many, many layers to them. They weren't just one piece of fabric like you get in ready to wear. Also, we wear knitted garments quite frequently as layers. So there might be layers of fabric underneath a knitted sweater. So obviously that will impact the way that we're moving our arms. But if I just do a quick demonstration here, in this top, you can see that the bottom of the armhole of the top is here, but the actual point of my armpit is about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters in. So there is a bit of excess fabric, a little bit. Nonetheless, I am actually able to move my arm and the top barely moves. But you can see that as I move my arm further up, the fabric starts to get pulled up more and more, right? And obviously, depending on how I move my arm, I can really hoik it up quite a lot. But in general, I've got quite a large range of movement in this top before the actual body of the sweater lifts up. But if I wanted an even larger range of movement, like say I wanted to do yoga in this top or perform ballet or contemporary dance, or, you know, something that actually required me to move my arms upwards quite a lot more than I typically do when I'm just kind of going out day to day in casual life, then actually this top wouldn't be suitable for that because I'd want the armholes to be much, much firmer up there. So if you think about the way that like gymnasts and ice skaters, obviously they're wearing those lycra mesh leotards and bodysuits and so on, but those are really, you know, skin tight, sucked in towards the bodies. And that's what I would expect to do for dancewear. So conversely, when it comes to knitted garments, when the armholes are way too low, which often happens with slightly larger chest sizes, often the armhole becomes almost comically large in some sizes and quite unrealistically so. What happens is that you can't move your arms very much at all without all of the fabric around your body kind of hoiking around and falling around. And this is just something to think about, like you might not care about it at all. But it's also why, like when you have those kind of poncho sweaters, when it has like a yoke that comes really low down and then very short little sleeves, they can be quite impractical because it can be difficult to actually do things with your arms with all of that fabric. So it's really depending on how you want to move through your daily life and what makes you comfortable. So the question about how to adapt patterns accordingly if you want to change the fit of the armscye, if you suspect that the armhole is going to be way too big and you're going to have a lot of pulling and drag lines, or that the sweater is then going to restrict your ability to move freely and uninhibited. There's a couple of things. You could just simply reduce the length of the arm size. So from the point where you make the underarm stitches, you can just knit the top half of the sweater much shorter, and then you'd need a longer sleeve probably. The other way to do it is to introduce a gusset, and this is used in, again, contemporary dancewear. Gussets were also used in, I think 17th century men's kind of jerkins and doublets. Yeah, 17th century and earlier, which were they're actually very, very structured, fitted around the waist and sleeve, but then with different types of padding to create the different types of ideal masculine silhouettes. And there's different types of gussets that you can have. So firstly, you can just have an extra wedge of fabric that gets inserted into the armhole. So the armhole is still very, very tight, but then you create an extra piece of fabric and that you insert it there. So it's the same kind of idea as if you have a pair of knickers or underpants for women, you have a little gusset that goes in between your legs, and that's an extra piece of fabric that allows you to have more range of movement and motion. And you also get quite simple gussets on things like yoga pants, especially when you buy more kind of sports engineering brands or running trousers, when I've often seen a little triangle inserted in between the two legs, so that again, you know, you can open, move, stretch, leap and bound, and that the fabric is moving with you rather than against you. So you have little pieces of fabric in strategic places that, you know, allow you a little bit more breathing room, and that, yeah, that just kind of helps move things along. So related to a gusset, but kind of opposite, is going the Japanese inspired route, which is if you imagine that instead of like opening up a little hole in the underarm and then inserting a little wedge shaped piece of fabric, maybe it's diamond shape or kind of crescent, like a croissant shape, you could just leave it open actually, and you'd have a little bit of a hole. But when it comes to Japanese garments like kimono or haori, if you think about it, they're extremely loose. There's a lot of loose fabric and the sleeve sizes are very, very large, and none of it is designed to fit closely to the body. But obviously, you know, you have to go about in daily life. So even though they've got the very, very large sleeves, the loose clothing around the body, they actually have open underarm gussets. So they literally leave gaps underneath the arms, which means that you can lift your arm up and there's a gap there, so it's not pulling fabric from the body around. And it's actually really, really comfortable. I think when I first read about the open underarm gussets with kimono and haori, and haori is the outer jacket that's often worn over the kimono, and I personally adore them. I've got two haori. One was a gift from my friend when her mum, who's Japanese friend, whose mum just I think like saw a photo of us together and was like, oh, give your friend this. Really, really nice present. And then another one I bought in a vintage shop in Birmingham in the UK, and they're often not that expensive. Yeah, really, really amazing and versatile jacket that I've actually worn to all kinds of occasions, to the point where my favourite haori is completely falling apart. But you know, the fact that I can wear this very, very loose and, you know, something that might appear kind of quite cumbersome, but I actually find it very practical. Well, maybe not practical, but I've actually found that I can go about in life and just do all sorts of things and go to all sorts of different occasions wearing it. So yeah, you could go for the open underarm gusset. That might be suitable if it's like a very, very oversized kind of thing. But the point I'm trying to make is that having experienced the open underarm gusset, it's not cold, you know, it doesn't feel weird that there's a hole there. Actually, you barely ever notice it at all. So it's just something to think about as an option. And you know, those two options, either having a gusset or just having an open underarm gusset, kind of negative gusset if you will, are the options that have been explored in pattern cutting. And both of those again are typically for woven fabrics, not knitted. So I think it's just down to you guys to experiment really and find out what works for you. And if you come up with a new solution, then let me know, because I'm sure we'd all be delighted to hear it. Moving back to the subject of darts, what I touched on when we talked about having a very full bust and wanting to take away extra wedges of fabric, there have also been questions about where you put decreases in, so where you put shaping in. So as I said, you can have shaping at the sides, or you can actually have it in the middle of the pieces of the garment. But you need to think about the fact that when you're taking away and adding fabric, that's, you know, manipulating the fabric in certain ways. So you probably want to take away in the place where, you know, things need to go away specifically, and adding in that place. So for instance, when you're, you know, creating a vertical dart in the body, you want to, you know, take away towards the waist and then add more towards the apex of the bust. So, you know, I wouldn't start increasing like right in the middle of the chest necessarily. You know, I definitely want my increases to be aimed towards the bust. And the same thing, you know, when it comes to above the bust, you want to think like we've got a big curve as it slopes in above the apex of the bust into the hollow of the chest. So you want to be taking away there. And then the same thing in the back. So again, this is not really hard and fast rules, because anyone watching is going to have a different type of body and, you know, different fat distribution and different, you know, musculature, depending on the kind of activities that you do. So I'm just trying to give you guidelines so that you can work out what works best for you in your own situation. So there was a comment on YouTube that said, due to my emphasized lumbar lordosis, I get a lot of excess fabric in the backs of sweaters and cardigans. So in my last sweater, I improvised 2 fisheye darts on the go down the back by slip, slip, knit and knit together. So the paired decreases to go in, and then make one left and make one right, so to increase out again. It works like a charm. This is not a question, just an idea for people with similar bodies. So thank you so much for raising this. So I actually had to search what lumbar lordosis means, because I'm not from like an anatomy, medical anatomy background. And it basically is talking about the emphasized curve at the base of our spine. And the fact that our spine, goes in means that often we have a lot of excess fabric hanging down here at the back, and also the whole, we don't have boobs on our back, therefore the shaping of garments on the back just ought to be different from the shaping on the front in general, and less patterns should be written in a completely symmetrical front to back manner. But I wanted to touch on this comment specifically, because I thought the point about the curve of the back is really, really pertinent. Also, I don't know this person's, actual like medical history or anything like that, but actually all humans should have some kind of curve in the back, in the lower back. And if you don't have that, it's often due to kind of postural lifestyle things, but obviously I'm not a physician of any sort, I'm just a designer, but it's something that you would work on. For instance, if you do like yoga and Pilates, or if you have to do like osteopathy treatments and stuff like that, that a lot of postural issues come because we're kind of living our kind of modern, very sedentary lifestyles in positions that aren't necessarily healthy for us, and we're just not moving around enough in general to shake off the bad postures. It's a whole nother field of study. What I'm trying to say is that most people ought to have a small curve in the back, and therefore, if you don't want too much extra fabric, if you just want to like have a more smoother curve in the back, you can expect to do little vertical darts there anyway, and that is what I've done on this sweater. So if I stand to the side, you can see, it's riding up a bit because I've been wearing it all day, but you can see that it is actually following the shape of my back. And making alteration for the curve of the back is often called a sway back adjustment in sewing. And in sewing, sometimes you have to you end up removing fabric actually vertically, because the way that you manipulate the fabric around. But in knitting, it's kind of easy enough to just kind of suck into small darts there. Another reason that you might have, feel like you've got a very pronounced curve in your back, obviously I don't know anyone's medical history, just to reiterate that, but another reason might be because of the angle of the pelvis. And again, that is, postural, it's cultural, partly genetic, I suppose. But the angle of the pelvis and the shape of the glutes, like the actual shape, which again could be down to exercise or whatever. So, if you feel like, the glutes protrude quite a lot, I'm wearing very loose trousers, but that could also be causing like hems and so on to ride up or kind of look differently. So speaking of hems, within another question was the comment that the bottom hem needs to be straight or it will drive me crazy. And this person was talking about jumpers riding up higher in the front than the back. And they believe that that was because they had a very full bust. They said that they're having issues with altering jumpers, but not cardigans. And I think that maybe that might be because, with a cardigan, you have the button band, so that is creating a bit more fabric down the front. Also, with cardigans, a lot of the time they are just written to be a little bit looser than jumpers. So that might be why it's easier to alter cardigans, just because there's sort of more points of reference. But the issue of the jumpers riding up with the fuller bust, actually that's just a general issue about hems front and back. So obviously if your bust is very, very full compared to your waist and hip, if the fabric is being pulled out more, again, it's being stretched outwards in one direction, so then it's going to rise up in the opposite direction. Because when knitted fabric stretches horizontally, it shrinks vertically. So that's probably why it's doing that more at the front than the back. So, it's different things that you can do. You can just add more fabric to the front, as well as maybe reducing some at the back. But overall, a lot of knitting patterns are written for, fun, to be fun, to make something, to be simple, to be in like a fun, smooth knitting experience. But sometimes, that kind of simplicity means that the actual, idiosyncrasies of our body are undercompensated for. But actually, you know, there are no straight lines on the human body. So the point at which, you know, the hem of a garment sits on our body is not a straight line, because we have got the curve of the abdomen coming out, and like I've got a little bit of a belly, you might have more, or you know, even if you've got like washboard abs, if you're like shredded, you're still gonna have a curve. It's not gonna actually be flat because you're not a piece of paper. And again, the same at the back. We've got the curve of the spine at the back, and then we've got the curve of the flesh above the pelvis. So that is the body. So if you think that when it comes to the bottom hems, we're putting a straight line on top of a curve, and obviously the curve of the body is going to push the fabric out and cause it to appear to rise. And it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. There's a lot of times I see like sweaters and they all ride up at the front, some more pronounced than others. That's because the curves on the body are pushing the fabric around in different ways. And you will see this less when it comes to looser fitted garments, right? Because the fabric is not being stretched out against the body in the same way as closer fitting garments. So what I like to do to rectify this, or if I suspect that there's going to be a little upward rise at the centre front that I don't want, you know, sometimes I don't care, but sometimes I am, you know, motivated to alter. And what I do is I just create a slightly dipped hem. So I work little short rows in a wedge, quite wide ones, just for a little bit to actually mean that the front becomes lowered down. There's more fabric down, and then the back becomes lowered down, and so it's sitting like a little smile, but then by the time I put those curves on the body, they actually appear straight to the eye, and that's because the curve has been pushed up, right? So it sort of adjusted itself visually. So I hope that makes sense. It's one of my other favourite little things to do. The last thing I wanted to touch on is collars and neckbands. And I had a few questions around this, and I had a few requests for specific ways of going about adjusting the collars, and I'm not going to be doing that in this video, but I will definitely consider making a tutorial for it. So Knitted by Whitney, one of my patrons, hello, said that I find that collars can sometimes be too high. I know how to fix these on a top-down sweater, but how would I fix this in a bottom-up design? So this is the question about increasing the size of a collar, and I also had questions about how to raise the back neck on a kind of yoke or raglan sweater that doesn't accommodate for the fact that your neck is lower at the front than the back, right? So actually the back of a collar has to be higher than the front for it to, you know, sit in an even way on your anatomy overall. So Whitney says that when she wants to increase the neckband on a top-down sweater, that she just casts on more stitches and then she kind of fudges the numbers round to work it back towards her size. Great, I love doing that technique in anything that I do. If I can kind of find out how many stitches where I need to add or take away at a certain point, and then if I think that later on in the pattern actually the measurements are correct for me, then I'll kind of go back towards that. That's sort of the alterations procedure in a nutshell. But how to do it on the bottom up? Well, I mean, essentially you need to know what you're aiming towards. So know the overall measurement that you're aiming for, figure out what it is on the back and the front. You might want a little bit, you know, the curve to be a bit bigger on the front typically, and on the back it probably will rise up a little bit higher. And then, you know, you'll be working around the neckband until it gets to that size. So it might be that you know, cast off a few more stitches in the middle. It might be that you knit a little bit higher on these little vertical bits on the side of the neck. Again, I'd need to see your example, but it's just about working out what is the difference that you need. You know, if you need it to be bigger, you want to add in a few more stitches here and there, add in a few more rows here and there, and that will create a larger circle. And vice versa, if you want it to be smaller, you're going to be casting off fewer stitches so that you've got more fabric, more stitches around your neck overall. So that, I think, has answered and covered most of the points that were raised on that open Q&A thread. Thank you again so much to everyone who posted. If you do have additional questions, or if there are kind of burning areas which you'd really need me to cover, or that you'd really like me to do a tutorial for, do feel free to leave me a comment down below. If you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, do hit the thumbs up button down below and subscribe to the Crimson Stitchery if you haven't done so already. I am releasing regular tutorial and talktorial videos that I hope to be very helpful for you guys on your knitting and making journey, as well as monthly vlogs of everything that I've been making in general that I release towards the end of every month. A massive thank you again to everyone who has supported this channel either through a monthly membership subscription on Patreon or through a one-off donation on Ko-fi. Your contributions are genuinely keeping the Crimson Stitchery going. I wouldn't be able to do this without you, and I would like to thank everybody for their support. If this is something that appeals to you, do head over to patreon.com/thecrimsonstitchery to check out all of the different benefits and choose the right tier for you. Thanks so much for watching. Take care and happy knitting. Bye.